Massive news. The European Union has said that it has 1,000 ground troops ready to send to Libya. But is the title of this video, Europe stands ready to help Libya, slave Libya with ground troops, is really a question. Are we prepared to send in a rapid reaction brigade, or will this be peacekeepers on the issuance of the UN providing the order to go? That's the question of this vid. With the Misrata being bombed daily, with Gaddafi infiltrating people into Misrata as mortar crews to bomb people and sever young children's spines and everything else, will the EU actually do it? And how will they do it? Will they actually send a rapid reaction brigade? And if they do, will it be over very quickly, or will this be a long protracted war? There's been, as I've mentioned, Niall Ferguson several times. He has said that there's a case for a mega war in the Middle East if the United States withdraws. What we're really seeing is a mega revolution. We're seeing a domino effect of democratic change within the Middle East, from Tunisia to Libya to Egypt to Bahrain to Yemen to Syria. And as I've said many times, will this end up removing the Saudi royal family and the Bin Ladens from Saudi Arabia? If the EU is really ready to find a legal basis for committing ground troops, when no other country within the EU is actually willing to do it, does it have the troops available? Well, the EU army is already the same size as the British army, as a cohesive force under a central command. The EU military forces from all the nations and the EU together is already twice the size of any rival competitor in terms of Russia, and is bigger than the United States, and only second to China. But it has better technology than China, and it has perhaps more advanced abilities to move and transport its troops by air. You know, we underestimate also the qualitative edge of the European forces. You might say flippantly that only European stormtroopers are so precise, to give a Star Wars parody. But this is a serious situation, and it's not open for Star Wars parodies. This is about life and death in the Middle East. How are we to explain this to our people? Well, it seems that the EU is very clever, and it's going to ask the UN, in which it has far more power than the UN. The UN is a very small organisation in actual fact, although people within the United States and the EU play up the role of the UN. Although it has been very successful the UN has been very successful in interventions throughout Africa. Notably, the exception is Rwanda and the Congo. But as I said in my previous video, there needs to be a European Africa Corps to solve all the problems of Africa militarily when needed, and also an Arabian Corps to solve the problem of the Bin Ladens and Saudi crime families. As an interesting point of economics, it is the US is only spending 1% of its GDP on fighting the war on terror, which is about $2 trillion. As Joseph Stiglitz said, as the cost of the fighting against the war against terror, fighting the war against terror, over up to 2017. Can the EU match this? Certainly can. It's the largest economic power on earth. And if the EU was to spend, say, 2% of its, or even up to 7%, if we were fighting on the basis of the Cold War, where we were spending 7% of GDP on military affairs would certainly outmatch the United States or China, and certainly have dominion or domination of the Middle East and North Africa if we wanted to. But since the EU is the nice hyperpower, and that's what we want to be known as, rather than an imperial power, we want to set up unions with people rather than to dominate them as colonies. But we do want to export our population to those countries en masse as well, to reverse the flow of immigration. What will we do to save Libya? Well, I think if the Europeans are simply waiting for the UN to give the order to establish a peacekeeping force, once that rapid reaction brigade is in, then the Libyans will see what kind of military force they're facing up against. The EU has successfully fought a war against Sudan in Chad, with the French and Swedish, who have excellent desert warfare skills, as they showed. The British also have excellent desert warfare fighting skills, as we learnt from fighting Iraq twice, and became masters of desert in those wars. Whereas the Arabs themselves in Libya are sticking to fighting along one coastal road system, and they're quite frightened of and have a healthy respect to the desert, as I said in my Euro Africa Corps video. Check that video out. The British recently have sent 12 advisors to help the rebels in Benghazi, but it will take ground forces, I believe, to prevent a collapse of Misrata. The rebels have already lost 10,000 people killed. Can we sustain this? Can we stand idly by and let this catastrophe continue? This has already killed twice as many people as died in 9/11, and it's Libya's 9/11 that we are seeing unfold every day. We're doing nothing about it apart from airstrikes. And the use of special forces, probably. Will we see a Euro Africa Corps? I hope so. I hope it will come soon, and I hope the EU is smart enough to be able to get their troops in without much resistance, as the Libyans will have to are trying to play the Gaddafi regime is trying to play the public relation game, just like the rest of the Libyan rebels are, just as the Libyan rebels are, and they don't want the Gaddafi regime does not want to be seen as the bunch of gangsters that they are. So they will probably allow the Europeans to put troops within their territory, and it may end up with the European Africa Corps moving at will across Libya with 1,000 troops, able to rapidly react to any incidents of violence, but while negotiated settlement continues, and probably with Gaddafi leaving the country in exile till some further date where he will be brought before The Hague in Europe and tried for his crimes. This seems to me the most equitable and quickest way to get Gaddafi out, but there may be some conditions of safety for his family, who perhaps, unlike Saddam's family, are not as guilty of widespread abuse, and it might just be his sons who just go with him to The Hague. This is what the Europeans perhaps are offering, and they're offering a system of immunity to people to leave the Gaddafi regime, and to eventually create a wall of non-connections around the Gaddafi regime and to wither it from within. This was what I called Fabian incrementalism, and I think this is the way that the Europeans are fighting against Libya. It's very difficult, even if the Libyans know, the Gaddafi Libyans know, that this is happening, to stop it, because it's worked over and over the centuries and millenniums since the Fabian general Fabius created it. Thanks for listening.